There was significant Klan activity. There were attempts by law enforcement officials and people in the public sector to try to intimidate our actions.
One of my issues on appeal was it's unconstitutional to kill an innocent man. And the state's argument was that's not the law. And they were right. You can kill an innocent person.
There was two officers who was taking me back over to the county jail, and one said, why don't you run so I can shoot you? I grew up in Montgomery County, which is Conroe, Texas. It was a little small town where everyone knew each other, but that was no problem. I just wanted to get away from the fast life out of the city.
Conroe has been described by some people as the most racist country town in the United States, and certainly its history and record of abuse and atrocities suggests that there may be some merit to that evaluation.
My job at Conroe High School came about when I decided to move back to Conroe. I stayed there for about, I think it was about 5 or 6 months, and then I was promoted to supervisor. My life in Conroe was getting on track, I thought. August the 23rd was on a Saturday. I was going to come in that Saturday morning with, I think it was 4 other janitors, and we was going to complete the job because school was going to open the following Monday.
Cheryl Ferguson, as you know, was a visiting high school student at this regional volleyball tournament at Conroe High on August 23rd, 1980, a week before school was to start. And she was one of many girls attending this volleyball tournament. And before the tournament began, she wandered to a distant point within the high school looking for a restroom. When she came up the stairs, she asked several men who were janitors where the restroom was. Those men included John Henry Sessom, Sam Martinez, Gary Ackerman. And they told her the restroom is upstairs. Gary Ackerman came on to her, as did another janitor, James Dexter Robinson, and Robinson and Ackerman together tried coming on to her. She resisted, and things got out of control. They dragged her into the restroom, they raped her, and they strangled her to death, and then they carted her body out and dumped it in the loft of the auditorium on the same level in another room. That's what happened. And John Henry Sessom and Sam Martinez, the 2 other janitors there, stood by, frozen in fear, shocked that this thing was actually happening right in front of them. Not too long after that, Clarence arrived on the scene.
Him and Peace and I had began to look in different parts of the school after we learned that there was a young lady missing. The body was found in the auditorium up over what is called the loft.
The community, especially the parents, whose children were to begin school in a week at this high school, were up in arms. They were hysterical. They wanted somebody arrested. As one Conroe police officer told another janitor within Clarence's earshot, he's the nigger, he's elected.
He came in on a Friday without doing an investigation. I was arrested.
Now they can go to the community and assure them that they have everything back under control. School can start with no problems. And so there's a sigh of relief in Conroe, and everybody goes about their business, except there only was one problem. They got the wrong guy. So the Texas Ranger comes in, arrests Clarence, puts him in jail, and then begins what he later confessed was 500 hours of investigation to build the case against Clarence Brandley, to frame him.
I was placed in handcuffs. I was taken to jail. Instead of going in and driving under the garage, they parked me on the side of the street, and people was all gathered around the street and walked me back across the street where everybody could see them walking me into jail. The 2 deputies who was carrying me over to the county jail, one of them made a remark, said, "Won't you run so I can shoot you?"
Ranger Stiles took the other janitors, the white janitors, and did what we called a walkthrough, making them all give their statements together as they walked through the school, getting all their time straight, location straight, and their story straight. It turns out that one of those janitors finally broke down and admitted that he had been choked.
Now don't forget, You're John Henry Sessom. You got two forces operating against you that would instill a great deal of fear. You have the Texas Ranger telling you if you don't go along with the program and the story concocted as a result of the walkthrough, you're going to go to jail. Then you have the real killer, Gary Ackerman, saying, you better not cause any trouble, John. Just keep your mouth shut or you're in real trouble with us, the real killers.
Was asked and forced to sign a statement, a written statement, supposed to be his own words. He couldn't read or write. He asked for his sister to read the statement to him. They wouldn't allow it.
My hope and my faith and belief in God and my family, as well as friends, writing me words of encouragement is what kept me going. And through that, I was very successful. I wrote my brother, who was Reverend Ozell. He was able to go to the different peoples, write letters, make telephone calls. He was like my legs and my eyes on the outside.
First heard about the case of Clarence Brandley when his brother Ozell Brandley called me urgently for a meeting to see if we would be willing to help in his brother's case. What we did was bring together a grassroots community movement in which we could hold accountable public officials and begin to apply the kind of, let's say, pressure that public involvement and public awareness can provide to any situation of injustice in the country.
And we certainly feel like if he was a white person, certainly Clarence Brandley would be free today.
The first trial ended in a hung jury.
There was a man, Dennis Schreck was his name. He was a juror in the first case that held out for not guilty.
While he was back there, they called him all kinds of nigger lovers and all kinds of, and threatened him if he didn't change his vote. They was going to do him bodily harm, all these things.
He finally locked himself in the bathroom of the jury room to escape from the barrage of the other jury members. The second trial was with a new judge, same prosecutor but new judge. Each morning the prosecutor and the judge would meet and have coffee. And during those coffee sessions, it was reported to me that they would rehearse what's going to happen that day in trial. There's going to be an objection on this, Your Honor. The way we handled it last time was like this. And according to the witness that worked in the office at the time, they would prepare and rehearse the rulings they were going to have.
When the jury came back in the second trial and read their verdict of guilty was read, it was like my whole life had flashed before me. And it was like, that really this is not a nightmare anymore, this is reality now.
One of my issues on appeal was it's unconstitutional to kill an innocent man. And the state's argument was that's not the law. And they were right. You can kill an innocent person. Next thing was newly discovered evidence shows that he's innocent. They said the law is you have to find that evidence within 30 days or it doesn't count. And that was the law. So the next thing was, well, the trial was unfair itself. Why? And that's eventually what we were able to show.
John Henry was a key element. What happened was John Henry gave us the videotape, told us exactly what had happened, how he stood by in horror while Ackerman and Robinson took the girl away. The thing that struck me was what John told us was that he's been having nightmares about this case ever since it happened. What were your nightmares, John? My nightmare is that I let one innocent girl go to her death, and I'm not going to let another innocent person go to his death. His nightmares were her screaming for help. In his dreams, he knew the truth, but there was no place to go with the truth.
At the time Clarence Brandley came within 6 days of execution, we organized a very large protest demonstration for the state capitol in Austin, Texas. And thanks be to God, literally seconds before our people, which numbered about 300 people, were about to take the civil disobedient nonviolent arrest, we received word from the Attorney General's office that indeed a stay of execution had been granted.
We got John Sessom's videotape on March 17th. It was St. Patty's Day, 1987. Mike got a stay of execution on the 21st or 25th, I'm not sure. A couple days before the scheduled execution, got the stay. 60 Minutes ran their piece the first Sunday in April. And then from there, the momentum started to really build and build, and had a life of its own, because people were coming out of a lot of areas with new information and evidence. And then finally, we got an evidentiary hearing for September of '87.
I asked for a change of venue for the hearing itself, and that was unprecedented. There's a change of venue for trial because you're asking people, jurors from that area, to hear the case. But since there was no jury at the hearing, the prosecution took the position you don't need to change the venue. But the truth of the matter was that the people that had things to say, like the judge's secretary, like the judge's court reporter, like people that worked in the clerk's office, people that lived in the community, were intimidated and didn't want to testify there in Conroe.
There exists here a volatile, explosive situation not conducive to the fair administration of justice.
Perry Pickett was a retired judge, a very conservative man. There was maybe 150 blacks out in front of the courthouse, and there was a single woman singing a cappella, Amazing Grace. We were up on the second floor, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The prosecutor said, "Look down there, Judge." Now, if that's not intimidation, and I remember Judge Pickett said, "Young man, that's not intimidation. That's the First Amendment at work."
We bussed literally hundreds of people to Galveston every day during the trial for every second of the trial process. We were tremendously impressed with Judge Perry Pickett as a fair and competent jurist, and he probably did more to restore some level of degree of confidence that indeed human beings can, even if they're of different races and different backgrounds, be fair and just.
What he decided that was eventually affirmed by the Court of Criminal Appeals was that Clarence Brandley did not receive a fair trial, that there was evidence that was favorable to the defense, or actually might even show the innocence of the defendant, and was not provided to the defense counsel, so the jury didn't get to hear it. He found that the investigation itself was designed to create false evidence, racial prejudice. The atmosphere was such that he was denied a fair trial. He found that Clarence Brandley was innocent, and that two other people, Dexter Robinson and Gary Ackerman, were, by a preponderance of the evidence, guilty of the murder.
I received what I'd been asking for from the very first day, and what I had been praying for, and what my family had encouraged me, as well as my friend, that that day would come when somebody would do the right thing, and he did.
But it took almost another year and a half before Clarence Brandley was freed, because the Court of Criminal Appeals basically sat on Judge Perry Pickett's decision and ruling and did not take the matter up.
As we walked out, the guards cheered, inmates cheered. It was something out of a Hollywood movie. This first step into freedom off of Texas death row.
This was a great day for me when I walked out the doors and heard the gate clamp behind me for the last time. And the saddest part about this whole ordeal is that they know who actually committed the murder. But to arrest and indict and to convict someone at this stage would be an admission of guilt. Still to this day, no one has formally or informally made an apology. No one has offered to compensate, any of that. Not that compensating would give me back the time, because it won't. And you can't place no price upon taking 10 years, almost a decade out of somebody's life.
There are other Clarence Brandleys. There are at least over 26, I believe, instances in which people who have been innocent and later found and proven to be innocent were sentenced to die in this state and other states around the country. Texas has the largest death row in the United States. It executes more people in the United States. As a matter of fact, it executes more people in most countries in the world, including South Africa. It has and will continue to happen, and that's one of the tragedies of the death penalty, that people who are innocent may accidentally or through human weakness or frailty face death or be executed.
Life has changed forever when something like this happens. It's affected your whole family, it's affected your life, it's affected your job, it's affected relatives, friends, it's affected so many people.
Stephen Oken was a predator. He was preying on innocent females. He took away 3 lives.
I could see myself as a very old man thinking back at what I saw that night. And it will never go away. Will never go away.
Dawn was our friend. She was our daughter.
She always was a person who would go to bat for the underdog. She didn't like people being picked on, and she'd stand up for her rights in a minute.
I remember the day she was born because her dad wasn't here. He was in Vietnam, and he didn't get to see her until she was 9 months old. Dawn was an A student from elementary school throughout her second year of college.
She was not a genius. Learning things to her didn't come that easy. She had to really work at it, and she put forth her best effort.
She met Keith probably 1983. He was supposed to be coming to our house, and instead he went to our neighbor's house by mistake and left a note in the mailbox. They only broke up for one day in 4.5 years.
The wedding was beautiful. Dawn's wedding was, to me, the happiest day of her life, and I know it was the happiest day of my life. Her mother was just a bucket of tears the whole time, and tears of happiness.
She wanted a white limousine, and we told her we just couldn't afford a white limousine. She was going to get a black limousine. And after I saw how upset she got about it, my husband and I decided to go ahead and get the white limousine without her knowing it, and she didn't know it until that day when she walked out the door, and her mouth fell open. She was just so tickled pink that she got that white limousine. He was in the Navy, and when they got married, he had another year to go, and he would have been out. We tried to talk him in waiting. My husband tried to talk him in waiting until he got out of the service because we didn't like the idea of her living by herself. But she knew our concern, and I'll never forget one of her comments she made to me. And she said, "Mom, I'm going to prove to you and Dad I can do it on my own."
When that phone rang, approximately 1:10 a.m., Keith had asked me, he just asked me casually, said, "Dad, have you heard from Dawn this evening?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "I've been trying to get her since around 9:30 or 10 o'clock or something like that. And I can't reach her." I said, "Keith, call me back in 10 minutes. I'll call," because he was calling from Oceana, Naval Air Station. And I called, and I called several times, and the phone was busy. And then I called one more time, and it kept ringing and ringing and ringing, and I thought, there's got to be something wrong. And I told Betty, I'm going down to see if she's okay. And I thought, maybe the stupid phone's messed up. Maybe she might have, I don't know, fallen, hurt herself or something, but I never dreamed what I'd find. I got out of my car and I walked to the stairway, and I noticed it's an open stairway there, and I noticed that the second floor apartment, I could see the television color reflecting on the ceiling, one of the curtains. And I thought, well, maybe nothing's happened. Maybe I'm just alarmed, because if something bad happened, at least someone would have heard it. Well, I started walking up the stairway, and then I started running without any thought. It's just like my body just went into full gear. And I came to the top of the steps, and I looked straight at the door handle, and the door was ajar. And that, to me, struck sheer terror. And from then on, everything was slow motion. I normally walk to Dawn's door and knock on the door and stand back to always encourage her to use that peephole. But this was totally different. I could see myself, I still see it as a slow motion movie. I reached to the door for the door handle. The door opened right up. The place was, all the lights were on. It was cold. I looked to the left. The TV was blaring very loudly, and the sliding glass door was open. Cold air was coming in. And I glanced over to the kitchen. It's just, everything was lit up. I could hear her dog in the background barking. And I called for Dawn, and the dog kept barking. And as I walked back, I kept looking to the right and left, trying to make some sense of it. And as I looked the dining room, I looked into the bathroom, into the laundry room, and it's like, this is unnatural. Everything lit up like this. And of course, when I looked into the bedroom, my worst nightmare was there in front of me. I had not seen Dawn nude from the time she was an infant. And to see my daughter in such humility and hurt, it's something I'll never forget the rest of my life. And the first thing I kept thinking, first thing that came to my mind was, Daddy's always fixed things. Maybe I can fix Dawn.
And he called 911, and they told him to take Dawn off the bed and to administer CPR.
And when I picked her up, I didn't even use any strength. I couldn't even feel her weight.
But when he picked her up to put her on the floor, that's when he saw the bullet casing on the bed. And that's when he said, "Oh my God, she's been shot."
And I told the 911 operator, I said, "She's dead. She's been shot in the head."
The pit of her back was still warm, and he had to shut her eyes.
We established a pattern. There was a suspicious individual in the neighborhood that appeared to be stalking young females and lone females, was using a number of different ruses to try to get to these females, claiming he was a doctor and his pager went off, claiming that he was conducting a survey and wanted to come inside the house, claiming that his girlfriend had locked him out of the home and needed to make a phone call. Once we started interviewing people, we'd established that the individual described by the various witnesses appeared to be one and the same. From that point on, the investigation moved fairly quickly. The mistake, quite frankly, Mr. Oken made was when he killed his sister-in-law.
Well, the graphic display of the victim, Dawn Garvin, certainly was left, nude, lying in her bed. She had been staged that way with the teddy bear in a very graphic, uncaring manner, versus Patricia Hurt, which was very similar in the sense that her body, just like you dump a piece of trash, here she was dumped alongside the highway, totally nude, almost positioned on the side of the road that anybody would ride by, you'd see this nude woman laying there.
The location in terms of the closeness to where Dawn was murdered also raised my suspicions. However, what really, I think, led me to believe that Mr. Oken was involved in the death of Dawn Garvin was a crime scene itself inside the house. It was a very violent crime scene. The victim had been shot much in the manner that Dawn Garvin had been shot.
There were some other symbolic acts that were similar between the two incidents. There was some deviant sexual acting out with some inanimate objects at the crime scene.
That, in conjunction with a weapon, was found upstairs in Mr. Oken's bedroom. The weapon was actually found in a drawer belonging to his wife. It was a small caliber handgun, 25 caliber handgun to be more specific. And that's the type of gun that killed Dawn Garvin. He'd been packing some camping equipment from a shed out back, according to neighbors. And also the sister-in-law, Patricia Hurt, her vehicle was missing. So we assumed that he had taken her vehicle to escape.
A nationwide manhunt for a mass murderer is on tonight after the body of a 25-year-old New Hampshire woman was found in the back room of a Kittery motel office. Lori Ward of Portsmouth was found shot to death and raped yesterday just after 6 p.m. And the police investigators are searching for 25-year-old Stephen Oken. He's considered armed and dangerous, driving a stolen white Mustang and on the run for a similar murder in Baltimore just 2 days ago.
Oken surrendered peacefully, but police had been expecting violence. Oken was said to be mentally unstable, armed with a submachine gun and an automatic pistol, driving a stolen car. A motel manager spotted it, and a police tactical team surrounded his room.
I wish he would have come out with a gun in his hand. I feel certainly it would have saved the family a lot of grief, a lot of pain, a lot of agonizing court procedure. And I feel that we would have had some sort of closure. And I don't care if people think it's vengeance. That's okay. Well, what he did, a little bit of vengeance would have done good, justice would have been served with some vengeance. The trial of Dawn's murderer started on her birthday, January 10th, 1991.
It was a strong, solid state's case in terms of evidence. A piece of his shoe was at the scene of the murder, and the handgun that was used to kill her was in her bedroom drawer, was in his bedroom drawer. So it's a pretty good case. The first trial was on guilt innocence. Did he do it? Was he the man who killed Dawn Garvin? The second phase was, is he criminally responsible or is he not criminally responsible by reason of insanity? The third phase is, what sentence should he receive for his crime? Each phase is dependent on the state prevailing on the preceding phase.
I looked at Stephen Oken every time I had a chance. I glared at him. I wanted him to know who I was.
He kept staring at us. He'd turn around and he'd look and he'd stare at us. He would pick up his tie and flip it with his hands.
He was had the emotions of a praying mantis. That's the only way I can describe him.
He never, not even the day he was sentenced to death, did he ever show any remorse. The whole time, he sat there and he sucked on a lifesaver the whole week. I don't know how many he ate, but the whole week his jaw was going around and around and around with this lifesaver in his jaw.
The only time I saw him show any emotion was when the jurors all stood up and pronounced the death sentence.
I can remember my hands going up like that. I can remember his mother screaming out because she didn't like the sentence. I can remember looking at him and thinking, you finally got it. And he almost choked on that lifesaver when he said death.
I never saw a person squirm so much in my life. That cold, cocky, assured attitude melted right there in front of our eyes.
Each individual juror had to get up and say that word, death. And when you hear 12 people get up and say death, it makes an impact.
And he squirmed and wiggled that chair back and forth, and his face got blood red. I knew that hit him. That was like hitting him right in the face with a frying pan.
He knew he was going to pay for what he did.
After somebody gets a sentence of death, the appeal is automatic, whether the defendant wants it or not, and it goes directly to the Court of Appeals, our highest reviewing court.
In a death penalty case, we've been told 10, 12, 14 years of appeals. So really, we've only been through, what, 4.5 years of appeal, of 14 years maybe? We've got a long time to go yet. That's not right. That's not fair. My daughter didn't get to live that long, you know. He has no right still breathing.
Do you believe it? How long do you think it'll take for us to get the answer to that question?
I don't know.
Will Stephen Oken ever be executed?
I don't know. I don't know.
The Supreme Court's definition of cruel and unusual punishment is the pointless infliction of pain.
The standard of cruel and unusual punishment is what is accepted in society in modern times. I think that any poll indicates that the people are strongly, or at least the people here, are strongly in favor of capital punishment for certain offenses. So if it is accepted by the community, it is not cruel and unusual as a constitutional standard. That's the constitutional test.
In 1972, the Supreme Court ruled that then existing statutes violated the constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment because those statutes didn't provide any guidance to the judge or the jury in figuring out which cases should be treated as death cases and which cases shouldn't. And so for a period of time from 1972 up until about 1977, we had basically a moratorium on executions while the states figured out what the Supreme Court meant when it said the death penalty couldn't be applied as it had been applied in the Furman case.
Before, defendants had been both convicted and sentenced as part of one proceeding. And the states decided that the court might be satisfied if these were separated out into two functions. The states gave the juries more detailed instructions about what they had to determine in order for someone to be sentenced to death.
Aggravating circumstances are, by definition, things that make this first-degree murder worse. In this case, the fact that it occurred during a sexual offense. And mitigating circumstances, they may consider anything at all as a mitigating circumstance. They are required to consider certain statutory mitigating circumstances, one of which is that the defendant would not be a future danger.
In the first instance, a person who's been convicted of a capital crime can go into state court and have the state court look at the circumstances of the trial and the death sentence and determine whether or not those procedures met the requirements of the Constitution.
After that, they'll be entitled to what are called post-conviction remedies in state courts. What that basically means is they get another round of appeals within the state court system, in the state trial court, the appeals court, the Supreme Court. And so they've gone through 5 or 6 courts at that point, and they still really haven't finished the process because at that point they have the opportunity to go into the federal court system through the Writ of Habeas Corpus.
The Writ of Habeas Corpus is a federal statute that was passed after the Civil War. It's very important to our constitutional rights. The Writ of Habeas Corpus means literally deliver the body. And what that means is that anybody in the United States who is imprisoned against the laws of the United States has a right to go into federal court and have that federal court look at the circumstances and determine whether they are there in violation of the Constitution.
Once someone goes through the system once, they can sort of start the clock ticking again by bringing another appeal on another claim. And this is a tool that can be used by defense lawyers to keep the person alive for a very long time without any good reason as far as actually protecting the person's rights.
That the decision whether or not to seek the death penalty in a case is freakishly determined. And it's based upon a prosecutor here, a prosecutor there, or politics here, politics there.
A white defendant is slightly more likely than a black defendant to be sentenced to death, and that of the people who are on death row, a white defendant is slightly more likely to be executed than a black defendant.
The most significant factors in determining who will get a death penalty and who won't are race, poverty, and whether you're unlucky enough to get a lousy lawyer. That's who ends up on death row. People of color, people whose victims are white, and people who have lawyers none of us would even want to defend us in traffic court. There's no evidence that the death penalty deters crime. States like Texas lead the nation in executions, but states like Texas also have some of the highest homicide rates in the country.
The fact is that a state with a high crime rate to begin with is one that's the most likely to react to that by adopting capital punishment.
One thing's for sure, if any individual is put to death, he will never prey on another human being out there.
The death penalty sends the message that it's an eye for an eye, vengeance, blood for blood. And I just think that's an uncivilized, barbaric ethic that belongs in millennium past.
The most sacred right that we have, each and every one of us has, is the right to life. And when someone takes that life, then they should suffer the ultimate price, and that's the actual sacrifice of their life.